things in a more interesting way. Thanks for that, Jay. So I see we've got cookie dough and fruity ice cream. So like a mango sorbet, vanilla, so steady, dependable classic. I like it. Rocky Road. Oh, Rocky Road is one of my favorites. That's awesome. So it looks like if we take a look at this chart, there's different ways to just approach leadership, assertiveness, communication, different things. And we all know that we function as different people, but it's always important to know that people are also going to function in their communication tactics very differently. So from here, we'll move on to the learning objectives. So today's session is all about enhancing our communication skills across various contexts. For the first part, we will explore the three different communication styles. Understanding these styles will help us recognize our own tendencies and how to adapt our approach when needed. We will also discuss strategies for communicating assertively with supervisors, as it is vital that you express yourself confidently and clearly while maintaining respect in these relationships. We will then move on to working with treatment teams, where it's all about finding the right balance between advocacy and collaboration to ensure the best outcomes for everyone involved. And then we will cover engaging with youth and their families. Maintaining professional boundaries here is key while offering support. Finally, we'll bring these concepts to life through a scenario based practice. This practical application will allow us to try out what we have learned in a safe environment. So please feel free to share your thoughts and experiences related to any of these objectives as we go along. Let's make this session as collaborative and interactive as possible. So first up, let's talk about what is a communication style. So communication style is the way that a person expresses their thoughts, feelings, and ideas when interacting with others. It shapes how messages are delivered, interpreted, and responded to in both professional and personal settings. So we can think of this as a lens through which our messages are delivered and interpreted, whether it's in a professional or a personal setting, with a friendship, a parent relationship, or even just a coworker relationship. And this concept is crucial because it influences not just how others perceive us, but can also affect how effectively we get across our messages. So next, we will dive into the factors that influence our communication styles and why they are so important. So the first thing that is affected by our communication styles would be our perception. So our communication style shapes the way that others see us. The way that we communicate leaves lasting impressions on others and can influence how others perceive our personality as well as our professionalism. Our communication style also effectively influences how we advocate for others and ourselves. So it can either empower us to be persuasive and clear, or it can actually hinder our ability to get our message across. Additionally, communication styles significantly impact our relationships. So they can either strengthen or break our connections and create misunderstandings. So, with this, we can have an internal awareness as to how we're communicating, as well as most of us have some sort of internal compass as we are aware of how others are communicating with us, which allows us to shift and go a different direction and make sure that we are always pointing towards positive communication styles. And finally, this will just affect any sort of relationship that we have with people. So it can help us form stronger connections and bonds, or it can leave people feeling unsafe with us. As a youth peer advocate, we always want to be mindful of these things. If you want a quick reference, you could also use the acronym PAIR, like the fruit that you eat, PEAR, and that would allow you to know more about the communication styles. And if Jay could please share, we do have some resources for this. So there's a small communication styles handout that just goes over what we just kind of talked about, what a communication style is, key things that can be affected for a communication style and why they matter. Jay will also be sharing another resource that will dive more into assertive communication and some tips that you can use for assertive communication, and that will be included in the chat for your resources. And you can use them to refer to as we're going through this information as well. So, from here, and just having a quick understanding of what communication style is and how we use it, I wanted to offer you guys a place to reflect. And so, have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, man, I really wish that had gone differently or that I had said something differently? If so, please go ahead and drop a thumbs up. And if not, you can put a thumbs down. And I would like you to just reflect on a time that you think perhaps you could have shown up more clearly, confidently, or kindly. So it seems like we've all had some experiences where we felt perhaps I could have done that a little bit better. So we're going to go through these slides and hopefully we'll have some options for some better communication in the future. So, first, we're going to go over the three communication styles. So, we will be diving into going over what aggressive communication is, what passive communication is, and what assertive communication is. So, these styles are fundamental in shaping how we interact with one another. Each one has distinct characteristics and impacts our conversations uniquely. So, I'd like you to consider how these styles might show up in your daily interactions, whether that's with a youth, a treatment team, your supervisor. And as we move forward, think about which style resonates with you most right now, and perhaps if there is a place that you would like to continue to grow. So, first, we'll go over aggressive communication. And the reason why we're using a stoplight is because with aggressive communication, it's an immediate stop. We do not want to use this form of communication. Aggressive communication is all about expressing one's needs in a forceful way, which often disregards others. It can be characterized by a loud, demanding tone, intense eye contact, and finger pointing. You might notice interrupting or dismissive language in these interactions, as well as perhaps an elevation in these speech patterns. So people might be getting louder, a little bit more flustered, speaking quickly. And if we think about the emotion styles that this is going to evoke, we're probably going to see a lot more of defensiveness and hostility. So we can think about how does it feel when someone communicates with you this way? And I'd love for you guys, you can come off of mute or you can put it in the chat, but how do you feel when someone communicates with you in an aggressive way? Does it make you feel positively? Not? Do you typically respond with aggressiveness yourself? Just want us to think more about that. So Michael said, I go, whoa. It can be very off-putting, kind of makes you want to draw back. That's a very good reaction to aggressive communication. Would anyone else like to put some insight into how do they feel, or what's their reaction when someone else communicates with them aggressively? I don't see anyone else coming off of mute or anything else in the chat, but if you guys would like to have some further input, please feel free to put those in there. Okay, so we'll move on to just an example of this. So aggressive communication can look very much like this short little picture that we're showing here. You have someone who's standing there, they're screaming, their voice seems to be elevated, they seem to be just a little bit heated. The other person is standing there in defense, their arms are crossed. And so a statement that might seem aggressive is when someone says, this is what we're doing, end of discussion. And so I can think as a YPA, it probably wouldn't feel good if I was speaking to my supervisor and trying to find some solutions, and this is how I was spoken to. So this type of communication is direct and leaves little room for dialogue. It can come across as controlling and one-sided, and instead of fostering collaboration, it shuts down any potential for input or differing opinions. So next we're going to shift to passive communication. Passive communication, while the intent behind it is good, it typically does not lead to the proactive communication that we're looking for. So this is one of those things where we might want to slow down, reflect, and think about how we could approach this differently. So passive communication involves avoiding conflict by prioritizing others' needs over one's own. The tone is typically soft-spoken, and hesitant, often accompanied by avoiding eye contact and fidgeting. This style uses apologetic language and can lead to unclear expression. The emotions tied to passive communication can be frustration and even lead to internalized resentment. It's crucial to understand how these emotions not only affect the communicator, but the overall dynamics within a relationship or a team. So, passive communication might look like, it's fine, whatever you want. And this style, because it prioritizes someone else's needs rather than your own, can actually limit genuine expression and make it difficult to convey someone's true feelings or needs. This also makes it hard for the person on the receiving end of the conversation to feel as though something is wrong and know that there is work to be done. Lastly, we'll go over assertive communication. Assertive communication is our green light. This is what we want to see. And I know that there can be a negative connotation with assertiveness, so we just want to really talk about what that means. So, assertive communication is truly transformative. It is about expressing your needs, thoughts, and boundaries respectfully without compromising your professionalism. So, it's not just about being heard, but it's also about listening and valuing others' perspectives. The key here is the balance of confidence and respect. This balance enables us to clearly express our needs while also being open to others' viewpoints. It is this harmony that builds trust and credibility. By practicing assertive communication, we can foster effective collaboration and nurture positive professional relationships. This is essential, though, not just in our professional worlds, but this could be applied to all areas of life. So I believe that we should all be embracing assertiveness as a pathway to more meaningful and constructive interactions. So let's take a look at what assertive communication looks like. So in this picture, we're seeing something very different. Both people are sitting at the same level. Their body language is calm, even relaxed. She's leaning back against the chair. And the statement being said is, I understand your perspective, but here's my concern. So that's a prime example of letting someone know, I hear you, I understand you, but I also have some further concerns. So let us converse about them. Let us figure out a way to move forward together. So now we'll talk about why assertiveness matters in youth peer advocacy. So assertiveness is crucial because it empowers young advocates to effectively voice their own needs and those of the youth that they support. So we always have to consider how communication can be enhanced with our supervisors, treatment teams, and families. Strong assertive communication is the bridge that connects advocates and these key groups to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Assertiveness isn't just about external communication, but it also fosters personal growth. It can build your self confidence and contributes to professional development in advocacy roles. But we have to remember assertiveness is not about aggression, it's about clarity and respect. So as we move forward, let's explore some specific strategies in which we can enhance this skill in our work as a YPA. Before that, I would like to get your input to chat and say, what do you think are barriers to being assertive in your role as a YPA? These could be barriers that you see when you're working with your supervisors, when you are working with your youth. I just would like us to talk about what those barriers might look like. So, one of the barriers that we might experience are different cultures. So first, I'll address Michael here. You guys, please continue to put your barriers in the chat. So different cultures, yes. When we are culturally biased, and everyone does have some level of bias, it can definitely change the trajectory of how we communicate. For certain cultures, it may be seen as disrespectful to look someone directly in the eye. It might be disrespectful for a male to shake a female's hand or to have physical contact with them. And so that is one of the things that we always want to pride ourselves on here when we are a YPA, is figuring out what is the culture in my family that I'm working with? What is the culture of this youth? And am I being respectful of it? I would always advise you as a YPA to go out of your way to ask those open-ended questions and have those conversations. If you observe that some level of behavior is occurring, even on a treatment team, where you might have a parent who's consistently and constantly looking down, and so is the youth, perhaps take the time in a one-on-one conversation after to say, hi, I noticed this and I observed this in your behavior, and I just want to know, is there a reasoning behind this that I could further understand and use to assist you in these meetings? So it might then be appropriate for you to either have the youth or family, or for you to assert it on their behalf and just remind the treatment team, I apologize, but it is actually disrespectful in their culture for a male doctor to shake their hand. And that is why the youth doesn't want to shake your hand, but she's not being rude. It might just be in that place to do that, as well as to just understand. So if you're doing a home visit, are you going to walk in and are you going to remove your shoes? Do they expect you to stand until you're asked to sit down? Do they want to meet you at certain hours because that actually would allow them to pray at a certain time? So it's always important that we're just keeping that cultural relativity in there, and just constantly reaching out to the youth. Again, as we talk about all the time, the youth and the family are the experts on themselves, so they can tell you what they need, but making sure that we're being culturally relevant in the way that care is delivered is always important. I also see that we have aggressiveness or passive aggressiveness from the youth or supervisors. So passive aggressiveness is actually not one of the communication styles that I decided to include, because it is a combination of both being passive and aggressive, and it does lead to more negative connotations. So I can understand that as a YPA, you may receive that oftentimes from a youth. Perhaps that is a place where they are not really willing to be engaging with us. They're not exactly happy to be sitting down with someone. And so we might need to build some rapport with them prior to getting into the nitty gritty there. Also, the aggressiveness from supervisors. I would ask, when you guys experience that level of different power dynamic and you're dealing with the aggressiveness from your supervisors, does anyone here know what to do? Like, do you have someone specific that you can contact outside of your supervisor within your agency? Or do you feel like this is something that you typically just have to deal with because of your role as a YPA? Okay. So I do see that there's an anonymous reporting system. So I would say if your organization has one of those, I would definitely lean into it. If your organization does not have a place where you can air your grievances in an anonymous way, and you feel like there could be retaliation from your direct supervisor, I would always recommend kind of just understanding and thoroughly knowing what the chain of command is. First, of course, approach the situation with your supervisor if it feels safe to do so. Try to have a productive conversation, allow them to know where you're coming from, and try to be as respectful as possible while doing so. If you feel like that is not resolved at that supervisor level, I would then look to escalate it through your agency, depending on what protocols are in place. You can probably find more information about that using your company's handbook or workbook that they provide to employees when you're hired, and just go about the system that way. I would also make sure that you're always documenting these things too, just so that you know for your point of view. Sometimes we can get really heated in something and then it's still being talked about 2 weeks later because we're trying to resolve it, but we don't quite remember exactly what happened. So if you have an interaction like that, whether it's with a treatment team or your supervisor, be sure to just jot that down for your own personal records. Make sure that that's something that you do escalate to your supervisor and then beyond, to make sure that you yourself in your role are being respected. And that way you can improve that supervisor and YPA relationship rather than tarnishing it by just feeling like I just have to accept this, but I don't feel respected in my role, because that's really important. Um, I see Jay also put in the power dynamics between clinicians and the YPA. For example, if you have a clinician who treats the YPA like a client, or a YPA who can bring some frustrations towards clinicians into their interactions with others. And so, yeah, so when we're dealing with treatment teams, oftentimes there's a different hierarchy in that treatment team sort of meeting. And so we're dealing with, clinicians, we're dealing with doctors, we're dealing with psychiatrists, we're dealing with medical professionals who have gone through extensive training. That doesn't mean that the YPA's perspective isn't supposed to be respected. It definitely should be, because the qualifier for us is our lived experience, and that's what actually qualifies us to be in a state to help people. And so sometimes it might be asserting your role, it might be letting people know exactly what you're there for and how you're supposed to do that. Sometimes it's as simple as just letting people know, I apologize, but that's not in my direct job description, but I'd be happy to work with you guys to figure out how we could get this resolved. For example, if they're asking you as a YPA to make copies, That's not your role. Your role is to be there in the meetings and support the youth. But if there's also like the passive aggressiveness going on between those meetings, another good place to tap in your supervisor might be that, hey, I've noticed that this is kind of how these meetings are going. It's taking away from me being able to be productive with this family. Is there any way that you could further support me? Your supervisor might be able to give you plenty of different options. Perhaps it's a treatment team that she's familiar with or he's familiar with, or they might even be able to support you in attending with you and helping you advocate for yourself and the family in that situation. And so I would still recommend reaching out to your supervisor and using them as a resource. And then Jay also said, as far as resources outside of the agency, you can utilize us at Families Together in New York State, and you can request individual technical assistance from us or recommending your supervisor to our YPA Supervisor Cafe. We also have our youth peer meetings, and we will have a new upcoming YPA Lived Experience Cafe. So these are all really great resources. By utilizing us here as a team, we have resources available statewide where we might know someone else that we could point you in the correct direction with. For the technical assistance calls, you can meet with us one-on-one, or you can come into a group like this. These are really meant to be a collaborative space where, yes, we are teaching and it is a professional development opportunity, but it's also a collaborative space for you guys to air any sort of difficulties that you're having in this role so that we know how to better assist you as the credentialing body for it. We also have our YPA Supervisor Cafes. Those are strictly for people that supervise YPAs, and it's also an open forum for them to discuss the difficulties that might be going on, and those are held by Families Together New York staff. So that means that you have someone in there that's always going to be advocating for the YPA as well as for those supervision standards to be being met. For our youth peer meetings and the YPA Lived Experience Cafe are also a little bit more of just a welcome space for us to collaborate. So the YPA Lived Experience is starting. It is brand new, but it is starting later on this month. And we would love to see you guys come in and it's a free space for you to chat about whatever else is going on, whether it's the difficulties that you're having in your position, or if you just want to share the positives that you're having in this position. It's really just an affinity space for us to get to know each other, to expand on resources, to just share our stories, especially with the Lived Experience Cafe. And Jay also noted that, yes, some YPAs have a high school diploma, no experience, but some of us also have advanced degrees and a ton of experience. But at the end of the day, whether we are a YPAP or YPAC, that's our role when we are employed. And that's the very truth too, is sometimes with our credentialing process, people may not even know that just because you're credentialed doesn't mean that you didn't go to college. It doesn't mean that you're not licensed. It doesn't mean that you don't have experience being on the other side of this. And so sometimes just letting people know that, you are here to support that youth, you're here to support that family, and just advocating for yourself in that space is also a very good tool, because that then role models for the same youth that is looking at you for guidance and the family that's looking at you for guidance. Oh, I can stand up for myself. I can assert myself. I do need, that respect in order for this to go well. And so we can continue to talk about those. And if there's any barriers that I don't touch on as we go through, please feel free to bring them back up. But I'm going to continue on, and we're going to start with communicating assertively with our supervisors. So as a youth peer advocate, there are several situations in which communicating with your supervisor assertively is not only appropriate, but it's actually crucial for your own well-being as well as the well-being of the youth that you serve and the effectiveness of the YPA program. So here are some key times. We might be looking at advocating for a youth's needs. So if you feel as though you're attending these meetings and you're noticing that the youth need is not being addressed, it is your responsibility to go ahead and bring that to your supervisor's attention, especially if you've tried bringing it to your treatment team and the needs are still not being met or addressed. Setting professional boundaries. Perhaps you have a supervisor who reaches out to you after hours, or there are people in your office that are asking you to do things that are outside of your scope of practice. It's okay to bring that communication to your supervisor and to let them know, hey, someone in the office asked me if I could work on this project. I don't necessarily know that that works in my role or that that's something I'm supposed to be doing. Could you just provide some additional guidance? Your supervisor might let you know that perhaps at your organization, based on what's written in your job description, it's a little bit more flexible outside of the YPA position. They might also be able to help you obtain more information as to what those projects look like and what you are able to work on and what you're not able to work on. But it's always important for us to set those professional boundaries. You might also want to communicate assertively with your supervisor if you're expressing a concern or a disagreement over something. If you are meeting with the youth and you are terribly concerned about other things going on in their situation that is making it an unstable living situation or housing situation, or you just overall feel like there's a safety concern, it's really your responsibility, especially as a mandated reporter, to bring those things to your supervisor and make sure that they are reported in the way that they need to be. So you guys can always look to the Code of Ethics for more information about that. You can also look to your mandated reporter training through New York State about that. And then you can also look at your agency's guidebook and the rules and regulations that you signed when you are hired. We would also say that if you're requesting support or resources for yourself, in the YPA role, it's important for us to note that sometimes while we're in recovery, things still come up. And that is okay. So you might be operating in a role and you might be hit with a case that re triggers you. And we do know that this is a very stressful situation to be in sometimes when we're having youth relate to us what are, the significant life challenges that they're experiencing. That might trigger you. That might make things more difficult for you to cope with yourself. And if you don't have a treatment team for yourself in place, or if you don't have a plan for yourself in place, you might find yourself being very upset, dysregulated at work. It's important that you bring that to your supervisor. Be honest. Let them know that you need additional support and resources for yourself. Many jobs offer all of their employees resources, whether it's through an employee support program or they might have counseling. Even if you don't have health insurance and things through your employee program, most jobs do have that. And so I would always reach out for that. They might also be able to connect you to some more local resources and everything else. But make sure that you're letting your supervisor in on those things. It can be exceptionally hard to do your job if you are not in a place where you can mentally and emotionally handle those challenges. And just letting your supervisor know that gives that transparency, allows them to better be able to support you. And the last one would be just ensuring fair treatment. If you are noticing that, you're going into, meetings and what's being said to one youth or what's being mandated for this youth is not appropriate, it's not helpful, it's not being done in a strengths-based place. You even feel like perhaps some of their human rights are being violated. That is your responsibility to bring to your supervisor's attention. That's something that's bigger than you, especially if it's seen in like a treatment group setting, or even if you're just experiencing this by what a parent or youth is relaying to you when you have your meetings with them. It's really important that we're stepping up as youth peer advocates and just knowing that sometimes it's okay to keep information internal when it's specific to our youth that we're working with and to families, but other times, especially when it comes to fair treatment, making sure that rights are being understood and that they are safe. It's our job to make sure that our supervisors know so that they can better assist us. So, while thinking about these terms that we might be going to our supervisors about, we should also be thinking about what strategies we can use to communicate assertively with our supervisors. So, the first one that I always recommend for people is to harness the power of I statements. So, this approach allows you to express your thoughts and feelings without sounding confrontational. So, for instance, instead of saying, "You never listen to my ideas," you could try saying, "I feel as though my ideas aren't being considered." So, by using I statements, you're orienting whatever thoughts, feelings, emotions that have come up about yourself towards yourself. And so, you're making sure that you're not putting any blame on anyone else. You are not being confrontational. You are immediately saying, "I need to bring this to you for me, for my own personal, and I would like you to understand it." So, you're also promoting that understanding language behind it. Asking for clarity and advocating for reasonable accommodations. So, by asking for clarity and advocating for these reasonable accommodations, that's going to really focus on the solution oriented ideology. And so, focusing on what can be done to improve a situation rather than dwelling on what went wrong demonstrates initiative, but also helps in finding a common ground with your supervisor. As we've talked about, navigating power dynamics can be challenging, so it's crucial to maintain professionalism while advocating for yourself. Do not hesitate to ask for clarity if something isn't clear and advocate for reasonable accommodations when necessary. By employing these strategies, you can build stronger and more respectful relationships with your supervisors, which will then pave the way for your personal and professional growth and allows there to be an open discussion with your supervisor as to what is going on, and you can compromise with them to come up with solutions that work for both you as well as the agency and the youth that you're working with. So let's put one of these things in practice. So let's say that we notice that a young person has expressed discomfort with a care plan and isn't being addressed. This might be something we're bringing to the care team or to a supervisor. But an example of communicating assertively using this language would be to say to your supervisor, I've observed that, insert the youth's name here, has consistently expressed concerns about whatever specific area of the care plan that they're concerned about. So perhaps it's they are being mandated to go to school 5 days a week and they are having a hard time with that. And so you might say to your supervisor, I feel that it's important that we revisit this to ensure that their preferences are being fully considered and that they feel heard. Is there a time that we could schedule to discuss potential adjustments? And so it's always important for us to notice too that when we initiate a conversation, especially with a supervisor or someone in a treatment team, a crowded hallway probably is not the best time to have this conversation. And I know that sometimes that's just what it is, where we are going from meeting to meeting with youth, treatment teams, families, all of those things. But if that is not the time or place, it's important for us to give that solution oriented language and offer that. So perhaps this isn't the time, but I'm noticing this. It is important. Can we choose a time to discuss this at a later time that works for both of us so that this can be addressed? Is always a good point too. So just being mindful of someone else's schedules, what their responsibilities are, as well as is the information that you're going to be discussing, if you bring up this concern, private information about your youth or their family that they would not be want to be disclosed everywhere else. So that's just also another way to keep yourself HIPAA compliant, making sure that you're having those intimate conversations if we're talking about someone's specific care plan and someone's specific treatment team options or their concerns, that's being done in a private setting to make sure that their autonomy is also being protected. Alrighty, so we'll move on to communicating with our treatment teams. So we will definitely want to work on effectively communicating with our treatment teams. First, you'll want to express your concerns and recommendations clearly. And it's important to note that it's not always about what we say, but how we say it. And so by being clear and direct, we can ensure that our message is being understood and taken seriously, especially when we're advocating for the youth's voice or preference. And then it's important overall when we're communicating with the treatment team to always point it back to the youth. So if we are noticing that the youth's voice is not being heard, their preferences are not being listened to, I would, as a YPA, point the conversation back to the youth and then give them the floor to speak on their own behalf. If they're unable to do so, then I would rightfully step in to assert whatever needs to be said for them, but always redirect conversations like this back to the youth so that the youth can really stand in their power. They can really make sure that they are the ones that are saying how their voice is not being heard or what their preferences is to the treatment team. And that also allows them to grow those skills that are necessary to advocate for themselves, which they will need when you're no longer working with them as their YPA. For this, we also want to make sure that we're addressing all of our concerns about treatment and care. And so we want to make sure that we're respecting the clinical expertise of the team, but it's also important to ensure that the youth's voice is heard. So this might mean balancing the knowledge and experience of the professionals with the lived experience and needs of the youth. So that is a very fine line to balance, but we always need to be mindful that that is what we're doing. We want to always take into account the expertise of the professionals in the room, but we also want to take into account the expertise of the youth and the family on their own selves, and make sure that both sides are being heard. So that's really where we get to be that cultural broker, where we can make sure that the youth is being heard, but also simultaneously, if for whatever reason the youth or the family is having a hard time listening to what the professionals are saying, perhaps they're using very large medical language, we can help the treatment team by saying, I'm not sure that they understand. Could we break this down into layman's terms? And so that's also very important. In this space, it will be important for you to also clarify your roles and boundaries, especially when working in a group setting, so that people better understand what you are here to do as a youth peer advocate, as well as how you can support the youth in making sure that their goals are met, as well as what your role is on the team and how other people on the team can utilize you to help that youth. And so we will want to make sure that people understand those roles and boundaries. It's also a lot easier to assert them and keep them than it is to do the wrong thing and be more flexible flexible in your boundaries and then have to tell someone that that's not a part of your role. So making sure that you truly have a firm understanding of what your role is as a YPA is of the utmost importance. Lastly, we want to promote a youth centered and the strengths based approach. And so that might mean correcting people when they're using negative language about our youth. That might be someone saying, I find that this person is very defensive. And instead of us using the word defensive, we might say, this person is very persistent in getting the services that they need. And so we always want to be phrasing things in a positive way. And by us changing that language in a treatment team, we're forcing everyone else in the room to also look at that youth from a strengths-based perspective. And that's what we want to be encouraging. So it might be also just correcting someone on their language. And you want to make sure that you're doing that in a respectful way. So if someone is speaking, allow them to finish speaking, then have your little comment after. Also, apologize if you're interrupting them or if it's something that you feel like if this statement continues to be said, this is negatively impacting the youth. You can also still go ahead and frame that back to the family or the youth. Especially if they're, whispering to you on the side and saying, I don't really like when that language is being used, encourage them to speak up in the meeting. And if they're not able to for themselves, then yes, it is your job to do that as the YPA, and then allow them to be able to assert themselves in other opportunities. So the last place that we're really going to want to communicate assertively is going to be during crisis or high stress situations. Now, as a YPA, we do know that our position doesn't typically deal with just high crisis times, but there might be a time in which we are dealing with a youth or a family that is in crisis. And it's really important that we're assertive in that moment, making sure that we fully understand what it is that the family and the youth need on our behalf, and making sure that they are getting those needs met, especially when it's a crisis, and that the options or the next steps are truly understood. And so perhaps this is a mental health crisis. The family and the youth need to understand what their rights are behind that. They need to understand if something's being proposed by a treatment team and there's several different options, whether they're proposing outpatient assistance or inpatient as the intervention, the family needs to be able to understand what those differences are. So you might find yourself in a meeting like that really having to say, hold on, let's slow down, let's ask more questions, let's be, very communicative, let's go ahead and put that in layman's terms. But you will find in high stress times like that, you will be called in to be that very strong communicator for that youth and for that family that you're supporting, and even for yourself. If it's a crisis, you might have to go to your supervisor and say, this family's going through crisis, but I am not available at all hours. So what are the other resources that I can get to them so that they are being well taken care of during this time as well? And so as we're looking at strategies for communicating with the treatment team, we can take all of the same strategies that we talked about for supervisors, but we can add in a few more. So for treatment teams specifically, I would say make sure that you're expressing your concerns and recommendations effectively. Make sure that you're respecting the clinical expertise while always amplifying the youth voice. Be persistent. Sometimes, especially like we talked about in that hierarchy, you can kind of get a little stepped on as a YPA in those meetings. So be persistent. If you bring something up and it kind of gets shoved under the table, bring it up again. And if it gets brought up again and it still gets shoved under the table, bring it up again. And keep bringing it up, but also then make sure that you're bringing that concern to your supervisor so that you can know when to escalate your concerns, because that is a problem if the treatment team is not listening to you. And at the end of the day, too, with treatment teams, I think one of the most powerful ways to deal with things would be to practice and role play. So with going over options, even with the youth and the family, it would be very helpful for you to go back and forth and figure out, okay, these are my concerns that I'd like to bring up in the meeting, and that's from your family and youth. Role play with them. Make sure that they are prepared for the different answers that might come their way, especially if you have a youth who can be a little bit more aggressive and assertive in their communication. Make sure that they're prepared that if they don't get the answer that they want, that they know how to assertively communicate for themselves in the meeting in a way that is respectful. And so giving them the opportunity to work on those skills with you in a nice, safe setting, and role playing those, whether it's asking questions from the providers, asking questions from the treatment team, even whether it's in an educator meeting, judicial justice, whatever system that you're helping them with, just ensure that you are utilizing this tactic as well, as this will allow people to start being able to hone those skills themselves. And so, in practice, if we were trying to address concerns about treatment or care, so for example, we noticed that a crucial aspect of the youth's needs, for example, their housing, education, social supports, etc., is not being adequately observed by the team. That's our responsibility to communicate. But just as we're talking about this, there's lots of different ways to communicate that. Our recommendation would be to use person first language. And so using that I have observed, or my concern is. And so go ahead and let them know what crucial aspect of the youth's need is not being addressed by the team. And then discuss the gap with the youth and collaboratively identify potential solutions. Then you can assertively raise this critical insight with the treatment team by providing specific examples of the unmet need and proposing a collaborative solution to fill the gap. And so by you going in there as the YPA and saying, I've observed, or you can even say, my youth has confided. If the youth does not want that information brought from their perspective, you can always use I and put yourself in that place for them. But then at the end of that, just also letting them know you'd like to propose that you explore some collaborative options. And so, what does that look like? It'd be very helpful if you've already come up with those options from the youth, and make sure that your supervisor is okay with that too, if they're someone that you've tagged along during this journey. But you just want to make sure that you're kind of always using that person first language. And so that way you can explain what's going on to the treatment team and make sure that that youth voice is always being heard. So having that discussion with the youth and their family about how their needs could be better met by the team will allow you to have something solid to propose, and then the team can respond and say whether or not that is a possibility. Alrighty, and then finally going into communicating assertively with youth and their families. So, first, navigating emotional conversations with empathy, especially when dealing with the youth and their families, is key. We need to be able to truly listen to and validate their feelings. And it should go without saying, but empathy builds trust. So, when someone knows that you can empathize with them, and that is really the shared experience that the youth peer advocacy, family peer advocacy, and just peer support services are built on, knowing that we've had some level of shared experience traversing the systems should be enough to build trust. But it's really important that we are also presenting ourselves in that way, that we are making sure that we are always open to listen to these families, to allow them to be heard and know that they can lean on us for support. So it's important for us to set professional boundaries with our youth and our families, and we should also remain approachable. So this balance ensures that we're respected, but we're also accessible. This is definitely important when you're dealing with a youth or a family who doesn't quite understand what the YPA role encompasses. So that might look like you having to explain to them more about what that looks like. I know in some coaching calls, we have talked previously about families who kind of look at YPAs as babysitters, and we have to assert ourselves more into the role to let people know I'm not here to babysit your child. I'm not here to force them to do what is in their plan, and I'm not here to police them. I'm also not here to report back to you what they're doing and whether or not it's right or wrong. It's my responsibility to support them in meeting these specific goals, and this is how I do that. Can be very helpful for families to understand how they can utilize you going through this process. It's also important that with our families, that we address safety concerns without overstepping or becoming defensive. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining a calm demeanor and focusing on solutions. Create an open space for dialogue. Now, when we're addressing these safety concerns, it is important that this doesn't completely negate us from our mandated reporter responsibilities. So if you are presented with a situation in which a youth says that they are at risk for hurting themselves or hurting others, it is important that you communicate with the family that based on what has been said and your job as a mandated reporter, that you do need to share this information, whether it will be shared as a written document or as a phone call, and what the next steps in that process are. So it is important that people just know what happens if they do voice those safety concerns, once again, so that they're not upset with you for feeling like their privacy has been violated, but that way you are also staying true to what your role encompasses and making sure that you're doing their job. The next one would be challenging harmful beliefs or behaviors, but with sensitivity. So if you're meeting with a youth and you are noticing that there are some harmful things going on in the house and the youth has brought it to your attention, it might be helpful for you as the YPA to maybe facilitate a family conversation. That is something that is done in our role, but it can also be something that can be a little bit more difficult when we are, speaking to a family and it's really about their beliefs or behavior, because these things have probably been going on for longer than you have been interacting with the family and will probably continue to be an issue. So making sure that you're providing them with resources, they know that you're not judging them, and let them know where that concern of yours comes from. So if you are concerned because you have noticed that there's drug paraphernalia in the house, XYZ, just letting them know, like, as a mandated reporter, I would have to report that, bringing it to their attention so that they understand what the next steps are and what they need to do. If you're noticing things like physical abuse, always make sure that you're keeping yourself safe first. So if there is physical abuse going on at that moment and you are present in the house, make sure that you can get yourself to a safe space first, call your supervisor, assert this, and then figure out a way to communicate that with the family once you're able to regroup and get back together with the family, possibly with your supervisor support there. The big one that we see a lot is addressing disengagement or the lack of follow through. So perhaps there are some barriers to this family being able to complete the goals that are set for them. So we might want to just have that conversation, allow them to speak to us and say, I'm concerned because I've been assigned to work with you guys and this is what I'm trying to do, but I've noticed that there's been a lack of follow through on the last three things that have been assigned. They haven't been completed, and I'm finding it very difficult to continue supporting the youth in this way. Is there any way that I can work on this? It might be a matter of building rapport, building trust with that family so that they can learn how to trust you. It might be a barrier. Perhaps they have transportation issues. Perhaps there's another crisis going on in the family. But knowing more information will allow you to have a more informed decision making process, and then allow you to know further how you can better support this family or if they need some more resources in order to get them to where they need to be. And then the biggest one with our families is just managing the expectations around outcomes. And so sometimes you have a family who's like, great, you're here to help us, and all these things have gone right, and they just expect it's going to be a snap your fingers, everything is resolved. And we know that sometimes recovery can take a little bit more of a journey. So you might have to adjust those expectations for them. Some strategies you can also use for communicating with the youth and their families. The biggest one, always, we're building rapport and trust. That is the basis of the YPA relationship. We want to make sure that people trust us. They know that we are here to support them. And building rapport might look as simple as just asking some questions about what it is that they like, how they like to do things, and taking the time to just get to know them. We always want to meet our families where they are. And so it's not our responsibility to push them in a certain direction. We are here to foster that level of success, but it's really just our job to meet them where they are. And so if they are not ready to do the very big goal that is written on there, maybe talking to them, talking to their treatment team, and figuring out what's a prerequisite goal that they could meet, because that's more important to the family now, and to the youth now. We always want to empower the youth voice and choice. And so that's both within the system as well as within the family. And sometimes as a youth peer, us coming in, we might be helping to facilitate some of those conversations, and letting the family know that the youth decision-making process and the youth voice and choice should be heard and honored and respected. As far as it's able to be in that family dynamic. We will also be there to help them navigate challenging conversations and situations. It's always important that for our role, we're doing this with some sensitivity. So understanding that if we're bringing something up like we've noticed some allegations of abuse, or we've noticed some bruises or different things like that, like, it's really important that we're using that language, that we're using sensitive language. We're not blaming, we're not using a heightened tone. We're really asking open-ended questions and asking for more information. And so you never want to be speaking to a family in such a way that they feel like they have to get defensive over their actions or over what they're going through. We want to approach everything with an openness that allows other people to interact with us, so we can obtain that information and then better know what to do. And we always want to make sure that we're engaging our families effectively. So if you have a family who says meeting in person doesn't work, maybe doing Zoom meetings works for them, if that's allowed to be done as an agency requirement for services. Perhaps meeting with the family at their home doesn't work, but meeting with them at a community center works. And so just paying attention to what are the barriers that they're experiencing, as well as what works best for them, will definitely help inform our decision making and allow us to communicate with them better. So, another example for this one would be if you notice a youth or family has unrealistic expectations about the speed or nature of recovery. And so you might say, I just want to clarify that recovery is a journey with its own unique pace rather than a quick fix. This might be a really good time for you to put something in about your shared experience if you're open to doing so and if it's relevant to the story and to the youth, and if you think that it would be beneficial to them. Because again, we are not the star here, they are the star, but it might be beneficial at this point to share something so that they understand, like, I've gone through this and this is what I have found as well. So you might say my experience has shown me, and speak to that. But you could also then redirect them by saying, I'd like to encourage us to focus on some immediate and achievable goals, for example, and then bring something up that perhaps you guys have already talked about so that they are more willing to engage with you and know what that next step might look like. So here, now that we've gone over those three methods for communicating, does anyone have any further questions, concerns, any other barriers that they like to talk about in terms of communicating effectively and assertively with our supervisors, treatment teams, as well as the youth and their family? Jay, do you see anything in the chat? I don't see anything on my end. I just want to make sure.
No, I don't see any.
Awesome. So I'm going to actually skip over this game really quickly. I'm going to go to the communication backpack to get some of your input, and then I'll come back to the game that we're going to play. So, the communication backpack. Overall, just to sum this all up, I kind of want us to think about communication, and all those tools that we use is this backpack that we carry around. So, what is one phrase or tool that you always carry, and why, that will support your interactions? For me, I'll go first. I always carry an apology. I think that the willingness to take accountability and to apologize, whether or not I feel like I'm wrong, regardless of my original intention, can constantly, and consistently does builds rapport with others and ensures that there's a person first response. So I'd love to hear from you guys if there's anything else that you kind of keep in your communication backpack as a YPA as you're going through these different ones. You can feel free to put yourself off of mute, or you can write them in the chat. Oops. Someone said we all need more humility, accountability. Yes, accountability is a big one. Oh, I like that. Peyton said, I like asking people to explain what they're feeling in the moment. I like that because that's like a stop, think about it, and then you can get all this information in from them explaining to you, like, what are my feelings? Because also emotions do control communication, and can affect our communication a lot. And so by being able to break that down that way too, you might be able to have a better understanding of this person's really frustrated right now. And so the way that they're speaking to me might be coming off in a more aggressive tone, but it's because they're frustrated. So how do I address that? Or how do I get them to stop and regulate for themselves for a moment? I really enjoy that. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up some questions. Give me 1 second. That we're gonna use for this really quick game. You guys can just respond in the chat. But now that we've gone over the assertive communication, passive communication, and aggressive communication, I did have something for us to go over. Okay. So these are just some like multiple choice questions. They're not very difficult, I don't think, but they do have some options. And so I'm going to copy the first one in there. So this one's more specific to your supervisor. Maury also put, I like asking what my youth can gain from actions and other ways we could or get to that point or accomplishments. I like that. So also asking, are there alternatives, ways that I could support you in this? Is also a great option to just to make sure that your youth might understand that there are different pathways to success for this. And so the first question that I asked, it's all in the chat. You guys can just answer from there. So it says your supervisor gives you extra work without asking if you have time or um, to just complete the task. So you feel overwhelmed. So what would you say? So out of these three options. So the first one says, say, I would love to help, but I'm currently handling other tasks. Can we discuss prioritization? Um, B says, stay silent and struggle to complete everything. And C says, I can't do this. It's too much in frustration. And so with that being one of the options, what would you guys do? And this is going towards our communication crossroads game. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're feeling really like overwhelmed all of a sudden, you don't really know why something was put on your plate, I would always assume that your supervisor does not know that you are inundated. And I know there are supervisors, and so you're like, how do you not know that you asked me to work on this project and this project and this project all at the same time and that all these dates are happening in this week? I promise you, our supervisors are not out to get us. And so really approach that with an understanding of they probably don't know and they really won't know unless you are advocating for yourselves too. So just making sure that, you know, you're able to say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. How can you help me? Exactly. So you can kind of reset and reassess the plans. And then that will also bring in some better communication because perhaps your supervisor just didn't realize how much was on your plate. So you can really have that conversation. Absolutely. I also see that Jay put in the chat that I carry with me the ability to rephrase when I'm trying to communicate. Not everyone communicates the same way that I do. And I love that, Jay. I love that you realize that not everyone else communicates the same way that you do, which means they may not understand and interpret what you're saying the same way. And so being able to rephrase that, one, so that they might have a better understanding, or being able to rephrase something because now you have a better understanding. Perhaps you have walked into a conversation, you felt very pointed in this direction, and then after hearing what someone else had to say, you now can rephrase your thoughts and say, oh, well, you know, I see it your way, and you can really adapt. And so I think that having that level of adaptability to adjust to however other people are coming to us with that is also very important. All right, I've got two more of these questions. So the next one is, so during a treatment team meeting, professionals make decisions without considering the youth's input. What do you do? So we've got A, interrupt and insist that they listen to you. B, let it happen because you don't want to cause too much tension. Or C, ask them, can we take a moment to hear the youth's perspective as their voice is central to this plan? Absolutely, you guys got it. So C, we're always redirecting over to the youth voice. Does anyone have any like techniques that they like to use to redirect things over to the youth voice that they'd like to share?
In the past, I have planned ahead with my youth, before any kind of meetings, giving them kind of like an outline of what they would like to say, kind of helping them put together those thoughts. That way, when a youth is being spoken over a little bit or doesn't feel like they're being heard, when I'm the one saying, can we hear a little bit from the youth's perspective, the youth already has what they wanted to say written down. They already have their points, and they're more prepared to sort of take over the conversation, and they feel more confident doing that.
I love that. So giving them kind of a scaffold of what they are trying to say so that way they can maintain their integrity during the meeting. They're not allowing their emotions to get too heightened and they know that they have something physical that they can look at and then go through the points. That's really cool. I like that. Does anyone else have any methods that they want to share as to like how you might regroup a treatment team and ask if you can hear more about the youth's perspective? All right, I don't see anything in the chat, but if you do have something to say, feel free to put it in. I'm going to put the last question in. So this one says, a parent disagrees with your approach and raises their voice. How do you respond? So choice A says, apologize and change your approach, even if you believe it's right. B, say, I hear that you're concerned. Let's talk about how we can collaborate to support your child. Or C, match their tone and defend yourself strongly. Peyton says B. I'd love to hear what the rest of you guys. Parker also says B. Yeah, so I would agree. So we're going to acknowledge that we hear that parent, even if they are raising their voice. We're going to allow them to do so because that's their way of expressing them, and then we kind of want to redirect. So allow them to know, I hear that you're concerned, and I'd love to talk more about how we can collaborate to support your child. Letting them know, I hear you, and I want to work with you, is definitely the best way. Does anyone else have? I know when we talked about barriers, we talked about like the hierarchy with that going through our supervisors. Have there been any barriers to asserting yourself in your role with parents as well? Like, is this something that you guys feel comfortable being able to talk to a parent directly about, or being able to tap your supervisor in on if a parent is getting upset with you, raising their voice, maybe a little disrespectful? Is that something that you guys feel comfortable with navigating? If you guys don't want to write something long in the chat, you can just put like a thumbs up or thumbs down. So it seems like that's something that we're comfortable with. Awesome. I love that. And I just say that because de-escalation is often one of the harder things to do, is to walk into a situation, find someone at a very heightened emotional space where they're speaking to you in a way that could be disrespectful, it could be very angry, it could be very aggressive, and then de-escalating. And so I just love the fact that you guys feel very prepared in being able to de-escalate those situations. Awesome. Alrighty, so we will just finish up here. So we have some upcoming events. First one we've got is we will have our next TA call. Our next TA call is going to be on August 21st, and it will be on the power of partnership, the value of mentorship in youth peer advocacy. We will be exploring how mentorship cultivates confident, resilient advocates, and why strong mentor-mentee relationships are essential for both professional and personal growth. This session will feature a dynamic panel of mentors who can share their lived experience, their tools for connection and inspiration to guide the next generation. And so you guys can look for that coming up next month. I'm really excited to share that with you. And then we have our Families Together events. So, as Jay and I were discussing earlier, we have the new Lived Experience Cafe coming up. Jay, do you know the date on that by any chance? On the next one?
I will look through a calendar for you, try to figure that out.
Awesome. That'd be great. I do know that it's supposed to start this month, so it should be in the next couple of weeks. We also have our youth peer meetings. So the youth peer meetings are statewide for youth peer advocates, certified recovery peer advocates, as well as the New York certified peer specialists, as well as some other just like peer-based roles. And that is an opportunity for just tools and strategies to be shared, do some networking, peer-to-peer mentorship, as well as the workforce development. And then we have the monthly TA trainings, which I just mentioned what next one is going to be.
I put the date in the chat. So it's July
Awesome.
20th. It's actually next week.
So next week we'll have our first lived experience cafe. We would love to see you guys there. Like I said, it's just an affinity space to give YPAs an opportunity to talk about what's going well, what's not going well, to get to know other YPAs that are around the state. We know that this position can sometimes be a little bit isolating depending on where you are. And so we just want to give you guys opportunities to constantly be connecting with each other, learning from each other, and expanding with each other. And so that's another option. We also have our Youth Peer Advocate Credential Advisory Committee. And so our committee is made up of youth and young adults, YPAs, and adult allies across the state who all have personal experience as a young person with a disability, emotional, and or behavioral health challenge, or experience in the New York State child service systems. And so we are always looking for people who want to become leaders in their community and that are able to attend our monthly virtual meetings. If you have any interest in this, you can go ahead and scan the tiny URL at the bottom and that QR code will send you over to the interest form. And you can do that. And then before you guys leave, we would love to know how we did today with the TA call. Like we said, these TA calls are really for the YPAs that are out there. And so if there is something else that you want to see from us, we would love to hear from you. And if there's something that we can improve on, we would love to hear from you. So I know that Jay is going to copy that link in the chat, so you guys can feel free to fill out that Survey Monkey. And that it doesn't record your name or specifically who you are. It's all pretty anonymous, but it just lets us know how we're doing and what we can do better for you guys. And then the last one is just thank you. So your presence and input are always valued, and we look forward to connecting with you again. You can also scan the link tree that says "Scan Me." It says "Families Together" in the middle. That QR code will take us to your our link tree, which has our Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok social media links, so you can follow us there. If you'd like to get in contact with me, my name again is Mimi Phillips. I'm the youth training coordinator, and then my email, phone number, and our website are available for you as well. And if anyone has any further questions or comments, I will still stay on for a few more minutes. I'd be happy to address those, even if it's on a one-on-one. And if not, then we would be willing to say that we are all set today and to wish you guys a wonderful Thursday and a happy weekend.
Thank you, Mimi. Nice job.
Thanks.